Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm glad to see everybody's joined us. I think we have a few folks on, and I have April here, and tonight we're going to talk about road trip destinations and how to choose a destination and the types of things that we can do, some tips and trips for making a happy road trip when we go along. So, April, are you ready to get started?
Yeah, I'm ready to get started. Thanks everyone for joining us tonight.
Great. Thanks, April. So let's just dive right in and let's just talk about what are some of the tips that you have for ensuring that you have a rewarding road trip journey?
Sure. There's so many different types of road trips that you can take. You can take a family road trip. You can have a themed road trip. So it's hard to, so I'm going to give tips on, things that apply, I think, to all kinds of road trips because you could have a romantic road trip. There's just so many examples. So some of the tips that I think are important to think about, places along the way, because I think the road trip itself is the real journey. It's the destination to me sometimes is like, that's when I'm kind of like, oh, the road trip part is over. And I feel this letdown because I so enjoy the journey, the things that you encounter along the way, the quirky diners and restaurants and the old neon signs, whatever the theme is. So it's important to plan. We talk a lot about pre-planning, and I definitely encourage research. Anytime is good to research, and I feel like I'm always like a bunch of free maps. I'm always collecting magazine articles and starting a folder. So it might be I want to take a journey in springtime, and that's my time to go, because you kind of have to answer the questions on the tips of choosing a destination or choosing which road trip would work best for your situation based on factors like who, what, where, when, why. Who's going, what time of year, maybe what kind of budget, and maybe a get together if you're all going to be contributing to planning, picking things that match your interests. So we go back to some of the tips for a successful road trip, and an enjoyable road trip is pairing like interests. Like if you're all interested in wineries or drinking wine, or maybe it's a literary book travel trip, and so you want to have some shared interests. We can't always do that if we're, maybe it's a family road trip, but there are ways to, have communication ahead of time and discuss your travel styles are. Are there certain people that have to stop frequently based on health? I've traveled with people, unfortunately, that need to make multiple bathroom stops. So that would go into planning ahead and knowing how far it is to the next maybe rest stop, or ensuring that the route you choose for your road trip does include known locations for restrooms, places where you can maybe get some food, or plan ahead and take a cooler with you and pick up some things for the day. As far as I lead a lot of road trips, so I always try to communicate, like, today we're going to be in the car X amount of hours, and we may not stop for, say 2 hours. So if you need some snacks, let's put some snacks in the car, some cold drinks, and plan ahead. So I think it's very important to have an enjoyable journey, to do some planning, do some thought process, and some priorities. What are most important? If stopping, say, at a historic spot and you want to sign up for a tour, then you need to plot that into your day. Like, we need to be we have tickets, we need to be at the state capitol at 1:00 to join that free tour, or, oh, that's not important, if we don't make it. So that communication, because you could really cause some disappointed travelers if they had their heart set on being at that particular tour and then you missed it. So there's a lot of planning, I think, and a journey like that.
Okay, well, that's great. Thanks, April. I think that when you were talking about the planning, that's really a big part of what we talk about, is making sure you talk and you communicate. So I think that will help. And so now let's just do when you lead your trips, they're often photography trips. So let's talk about some tips around having a photographer's road trip and what you would suggest in that area.
Sure. When you're going with a bunch of photographers, it's important to really be cognizant. And you can even, as a photographer, plan to join up with someone that does your driving. A lot of times, someone that consider themselves a photographer is the perfect person to be your driver. Ask them to do the driving so you can be looking and asking to stop. And through your
Oh, we lost you.
they cool old neon signs, or there's this little fruit stand that's here. So that can be important, as also to be aware with photographers. I talk a lot with my photographers about being aware of private property and boundaries. You can see a lot of fascinating things when you're driving down the road, but it's really important when you pull off, that you're looking behind you, use your common driving sense, like put on your signal, try to choose a spot that you're not killing the 5 people behind you. Make sure there's clearance. If you're pulling onto a country lane, you may think like, oh, nobody goes down this lane. In Vermont, it's very common. The Midwest, you have large farm vehicles and farm equipment, and these people are trying to get the job done. Here you are taking up the whole little gravel path to park your car because you see the red barn and the hill and the beautiful scene. So you need to be aware of that and be respectful. I think respect is a good word of, that's someone's home. That could be a private barn. Don't just, unfortunately, I've seen good people, good photographers, bad photographers. It may not be a judgment call, but it's definitely our responsibility, if that's private property, to be respectful and, not cross, just hop over the fence and, climb into their chicken coop because you're like, oh my gosh, look at all these amazing chickens and, running around their hillside,
Right.
So being aware, just being aware. And also, as I mentioned to people when I'm driving, choosing what roads you may want to drive down. If you're on the interstate, it's definitely not always safe to just pull over. You've got semis flying past you at 70 miles an hour. If one, you're right in the way. So if you do see something and it's a lot of busy traffic, get inside the guardrail. Years ago, my dad said, get on the other side of the guardrail. Try to put something between you and the road. If possible, if you really feel like you need that picture, find a driveway, as I mentioned. Same with the 2-lane, narrow, beautiful roads that I drive in New England. Look in the rearview mirror. I mean, by all, be respectful. If you see cars stacking up behind you, look for the next place where it's safe to pull over. Let them all get past you. I mean, they're trying to go about their life, go to school, take their kids. And
Right.
You getting the barn can wait 5-10 minutes. So those are some important tips. And having a shot list. So we have fun in the car chatting about, hey, today we haven't seen a red and a 2-lane road. And so we'll keep our eyes open for that. And that's a lot of fun too. But we're working together with your group and trying to make it enjoyable and fun, but also safe. It's always, important to be safe.
Right. And I think we talked about this property, and I would imagine as a photographer, it's something that you want to do is maybe even ask the folks, if you come up to a piece of property, it's probably better to go up and knock on the door and say, do you mind if we take photos here, versus just traipsing across their yard or the lawn or whatever just because you want to take the picture. And you do that as well, right? That's something that you would encourage folks to do, is to ask permission.
Definitely.
Yeah. And so then let's just talk about safety. That's I'm going to skip a question and go on to safety because you brought that up. So what are some of the safety tips that you have, aside from things like just being an aware driver, right? That's certainly the number one thing. Please pay attention. We get caught up in what you're seeing on the road, and it's easy to just stop and take a picture and forget that you're holding up traffic, right?
Right. As a road trip, general safety, you may want to think about, if you're traveling with a group or even if you're going on your own trip, it might make sense depending on the make or model of the vehicle you own. I know for myself, sometimes it's worth it to rent the vehicle. There's sites like, and I didn't include this one in the notes, but I should have, iMova.com is a really great site. If you have time, you can rent an RV for sometimes like it's like $1 a day. So if your
technology gets in the way.
I was talking about AAA, which many people have. It's an easy to be a member of AAA. Keep the phone number. I mentioned downloading your maps because it's super. Many places don't have connection, and I've actually turned down some gravel roads in Vermont. And had I not had the offline map saved to my phone, it starts to get dark, I may not be able to make it back to the main road. Cindy and I know we always talk about paper maps, having a copy of a paper map and marking where you're at and looking for where the towns are. And that morning, I'll often give a highlighted map to someone in the car, is just to kind of, so they're aware too, like, gosh forbid something happens to me and they don't know which direction closest to, because a lot of the signs don't always tell you where you're heading next. So those are some quick safety tips. We should probably get to the next question.
Before we disconnect again.
Did I miss? I know. Did I miss something? I feel horrible.
No, I know. There's not much we can do about it. No, I think we covered it. I think really the things that we talked about earlier were things like your offline map, both offline on your phone as well as the paper map, having AAA, which most people know that that's an important aspect of safety. You talked about the flares or some sort of safety kit, some way to show that you've pulled off to the side of the road, especially if this happens to you at night,
Right.
and those kinds of things. So all of that, and making sure you know your car. I myself have had that problem where a rental car did not have a spare tire, so I always check. So yeah, those are all those things were things. I think those are what we talked about earlier. So let's just talk a little bit about how you plan your road trips. Let's move on to that question.
This is my favorite part, honestly. I love planning road trips, and I love planning other people's trips. It's something that I take a lot of joy in. It's something that I think is just part of my being from growing up. My dad would come home with a bunch of maps. I don't know. He worked at the Department of Transportation. So as a kid, I quickly learned how to read a map. I quickly would learn to look at a map and go, oh my gosh, there's this little historic little state park over there. What's that about? And I came up in the era, as I know Cindy did a little bit too. We didn't have the internet to like do a Google search or a TripAdvisor or Yelp, some of the great sites that are out there now. There's a site called Road Trippers that I'll touch on. I haven't personally used Road Trippers a lot, but for someone going online, I love some of the features. It lets you put in a destination. You can put in up to 5 free destinations. You pay extra.
Or what the connection problem is, but I think we're back in business.
We may have to
double check.
Re-record it for
we might have to. Okay, I think we're back. I think everybody can see us now. So sorry, everyone, about that. That's just a bit of technology getting in the way and connectivity. And we've not had this problem before where we've been disconnected. We've had a little hiccup before, but...
Right, I know. This was crazy.
Yeah, tonight was not fun. So thank you for everyone for just like bearing with us as we try to resolve that connectivity issue. Okay, so you were talking, April, about planning trips, and you were giving us some websites and some things, so let's reconnect back to there about Road Tripper, I think was where you left off.
Yeah, roadtrippers.com, and I know I had a little list I gave so people can go check those out. Yes. I haven't spent a lot of time on road trips. I'm kind of old-fashioned as far as working with a paper map, a highlighter, photos I found on Instagram, Google searches, bookshelves of books. I'm old-fashioned that way. I love my books and my even old books. Old books are excellent sources of information. You can find old, go on eBay. Amazon has copies of old books. Used bookstores, you can pick up a used, National Geographic used to put out a really nice set of driving guides that's out of print, but all those roads are still there. The scenic state parks, out of the historic homes. So that's where you can get some great information if you're not doing a Google search. But Road Trippers, I kind of like. It allows you to pick options. You go to their screen and you can plot in, like, if you like bed and breakfast. I like to have some of those options. You can put in rest stops, gas stations, historic spots. So that's a really good site. I know Cindy uses Prep a Trip a lot if you're working with a group of people. and it allows you to, if you were going to plan to bring some of your food with you and plan a more budget road trip, you could assign them and you could see Susan's bringing the cutlery, or Susan's bringing the buns, or whatever it is, and kind of split up those. And I think Prep a Trip, and I noticed Road Trippers does too, it has a budget option in there where you can kind of pre-split the money out, which is kind of a nice feature, I think.
Yeah, and we use Prep a Trip on some things for the carpooling aspect.
Right,
right. Because you can do that there too.
Yeah. And I think another one I listed, the one I use a lot is Google Maps. I think it's MapQuest or something like that. And I use that a lot when I'm mapping out trips for my clients. A lot of times I like that one. It breaks down the mileage. I can add in stops, and then it can try different routes and see it on the screen visually, and then they can convert it into their GPS device if they want as well. So I know we shared some of that. I think I had another site listed as well. MapQuest, Prep a Trip.
We have on the list, I'm looking, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay,
Did I freeze?
Don't freeze, no.
I know.
No, you're good. Okay, so the ones, I'll just read them off. We have roadtrippers.com, MapQuest, Google Maps, Prep a Trip, the AAA, Allstays, Hotels.com, TripAdvisor, and Yelp. Those are the things that you've listed, and I've got that up on the screen now for folks to see.
Perfect. Yeah, so those are all tools I use. And also I spend a lot of time educate yourself on what kind of road trip. Like I said, make a lot of time, as we know in California, like if you're just trying to zip up the middle of the state to get to Sacramento, you can jump on the 5. You can take the more scenic route and take the coastal route and have a much more enjoyable trip, get out and see different beaches, some small towns, but then you might as well double the amount of hours to allocate for that. So it's really important to look at how many hours in the day. And I do this a lot with New England, because depending on time of year, say it's fall, you're going to lose daylight maybe at 6 o'clock, and now it's dark, so you're not going to be able to see anything. So you're going to probably want to be off the road. At least for me, I'm done at 6 o'clock. So now if the sunlight doesn't come up till 7 or 8, you can start deducting back, and that for me goes into the planning process as well. If you stop for lunch at a nicer restaurant, add more time. If you're going to just make quick road stops, now you have more time for other things. So just some quick tips on. But I know we're at the end of the hour, so does anyone have questions? I'm so sorry about tonight.
I know, it's been a little crazy. Let's see if anybody has posted any questions here, even though we've had some difficulty. So I'll wait a few minutes. While we're waiting to see if anybody has any questions, do you want to just tell us about a great road trip or something, what you've got planned? Maybe we can just talk about that and we see if anybody has questions.
I think every year is a great time to take a road trip. You can really bond on a road trip. I mean, as I mentioned, the road trip for me is the most exciting part. The planning it, the camaraderie, and you really get close to people when you're in the same vehicle. I've done road trips where you're kind of split out between 2 vehicles, and then sometimes it's fun to rotate who you're sitting with, because just in the course of being in the car and sharing stories, or you have a shared goal, like today we're looking for, like I said, I mentioned a photography list, like, hey, we haven't seen, we'll look at it each day, like, hey, we saw a red tree, now we're looking for a cow with a barn with a tree, and then it puts it out there for the universe. It happened to me, it was wonderful on one of the trips up the coast this past year. We were doing that checklist of what we'd seen along Hearst Castle, and I just kind of threw it out there, like, well, I know there's zebras along Hearst Castle, and all of a sudden I look, and there came the zebras, and this was like, oh my gosh.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so that was really rewarding. But my road trips this year I have planned are Montana for the ghost towns. I want to go back to New England, probably Upper Michigan for the fall colors, and if I can, get back to Alaska for the northern lights and the beautiful sights there. So I'm always looking for another road trip.
Okay. I love road trips too. Okay, Heather has a question. She's asking who has the cleanest bathrooms. I imagine she's asking where would you suggest to stop for a bathroom on your way on the road. So what do you got for her there?
Road trip stops are, look for, if you're in the small towns, public libraries all have, and like county buildings. Like the littlest small town may have a public library or even a courthouse, and those are public. You walk in and just ask the clerk if it's a courthouse. They'll tell you, oh, go down that hall, and those are super clean. We all generally know about McDonald's and some of the fast food places, but first choice for me is always like the libraries and the courthouses in small towns.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that, and that's actually probably fantastic, and probably cleaner than like the gas stations or the McDonald's even.
Right.
Because they maintain them. Yeah, that's a wonderful idea, and you don't need to be a customer. You can just go in, right?
Yeah, and that's what I love about it.
All right, well, I hope we answered your question, Heather, and I don't see any other questions. I'm so sorry. I think we missed a couple of your topics, April, but we're at the end at 6:30, so I'm going to go ahead and close it off, and I apologize to everybody for all of our disruption, but there's not a lot we can do with the internet